Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Today I'm coming to you with the belated weekly rambles, where I look at what I've been appreciating this week, both on Booktube and beyond. Like several of the rest of you, I've taken off a little bit more time than usual, just a week, but I'm glad to be back today. First, an update on the baby birds living in the robin's nest right outside my front door. I introduced you to the 3 babies last week in my weekly rambles, and now they are quite a bit bigger, filling up their nest, and their feathers have started to come in. Their parents still come regularly to feed them, but every day they create a little Bildungsroman, to use the literary term, where I watch them grow up, even try to spread their wings and fly a bit. Some of the other events of my week have been a bit more bookish. Although I'm not quite finished yet, I have enjoyed reading Dodie Smith's I Capture the Castle this week, and I'll talk a little bit more about it on Friday. But this weekend, my spouse and I had a date. Alone together upstairs while drinking champagne, we watched the 2003 screen adaptation of I Capture the Castle, available on Amazon Prime and I believe also for free on YouTube. In many ways, the film was great. It was beautifully filmed and had wonderful costumes, and it definitely captures the funny but nevertheless dark tone of the book. But it misses some of the charm I've enjoyed most in the novel. Smith's book is in some ways a simple romance, but in other ways a Bildungsroman, to use the literary term again, of a budding writer. Books, the reading of them and the writing of them, are at the core of this novel. And the film version struggles to give the kind of resonance that the book does. Perhaps the most charming part of the screen adaptation is that one of the major characters is played by a very young and already very handsome Henry Cavill. I've loved him ever since I saw the video of him reading aloud. I'll link to that reading video below. Since the I Capture the Castle read-along included a bingo card, I tried to meet a few prompts, including watching a few minutes of the solstice celebration at Stonehenge, streamed online, and having an afternoon Father's Day tea party on Sunday, where my son made chocolate chip scones and served them along with some amazing fresh cherries. Another group reading project was the Juneteenth edition of Blackathon, celebrating both Black authors and Black literature, as well as LGBTQ+ writers and themes during Pride Month. I chose to pick up The Color Purple by Alice Walker. I first read The Color Purple back in 1984 or so, soon after it won the Pulitzer Prize. My spouse, a man I didn't meet for several more years, read it soon after, I think at the end of his senior year of high school. Although he had not been an obsessive reader as a young person, he fell in love with The Color Purple. When we finally met, I think we recognized something in each other, partly because we were both excited to talk about that book, and then to read many more books together over the years. On Juneteenth, David read the first few sections of the novel aloud to me, and I think we both were pleased to see how well Alice Walker's book works as a read-aloud. Even though it's an epistolary novel, which I wouldn't immediately assume would work aloud, Walker is really cognizant of sound and tone, and it's an amazing book. I've also continued my reading for Toni Morrison 2020, where a bunch of us are working our way through all the novels of Toni Morrison in chronological order during the year. This month, for me, is the month for Beloved, a book I read as soon as it was published and have reread a time or two, although not in a while. Yet again, I was completely awed by it. I couldn't imagine not giving The Bluest Eye or Sula and Song of Solomon anything but 5 stars, something I will do when I finally get around to updating my long-ignored Goodreads account. But then a book like Beloved comes along, and suddenly almost nothing deserves as many stars as I want to give it. Instead of adjusting everything else downward, I'm just going to give this book 6 stars on the 5-star scale. That works, right? I'm not much of a quant, even when it comes to books. Anyway, Toni Morrison is not, to my knowledge, a queer author, nor does her book really clearly discuss queer themes. But Morrison has a quote in this book that seems perfect for this time. This LGBTQ plus Pride Month, this time when we're also thinking about Black Pride and the need for Black joy. Let me read it to you. Here, in this here place, we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. Love it hard. Yonder they do not love your flesh, they despise it. They don't love your eyes, they just as soon pick 'em out. No more do they love the skin on your back. Yonder they flay it, and oh, my people, they do not love your hands. Those they only use, tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. Love your hands, love them, raise them up and kiss them. Touch others with them, pat them together, stroke them on your face, because they don't love that either. You got to love it, you. And no, they ain't in love with your mouth. Yonder out there, they will see it broken and break it again. What you say out of it, they will not heed. What you scream from it, they do not hear. What you put into it to nourish your body, they will snatch away and give you leavings instead. No, they don't love your mouth. You got to love it. This is flesh I'm talking about here, flesh that needs to be loved, feet that need to rest and dance, backs that need support, shoulders that need arms, strong arms, I'm telling you. And oh, my people, out yonder, hear me, they do not love your neck, unnoosed and straight. So love your neck. Put a hand on it, grace it, stroke it and hold it up. And all your inside parts that they just as soon slop for hogs, you gotta love them. That dark, dark liver, love it, and the beat and beating heart, love that too, more than eyes or feet, more than lungs that have yet to draw free air, more than your life-holding womb and your life-giving private parts. Hear me now, love your heart, for this is the prize. Well, I've been very pleased to read the Morrison books with a bunch of you. Brian at Bookish usually puts out a Saturday hodgepodge video where he ties together information about what he's read and what he's learned from his reading, along with events in his non-bookish life sometimes and shout-outs to great small booktubers or to great questions that larger booktubers address, etc. This week's edition seemed especially brilliant. After talking about how much he enjoyed Morrison's Beloved, he started talking about Flannery O'Connor, a white woman writer, especially known for her short stories, who lived in the mid-20th century South, surrounded by not just racist ideology, but legal segregation. An essay was just published that excoriates her racism, and Brian asked some pretty thoughtful questions about whether to read O'Connor now, given those claims. Yes, this is a much bigger topic and deserves a long discussion, but in just a few sentences, Brian made me think about how Southern white authors in general, especially those from the 20th century who grew up in a place and time of deeply ingrained racism, face both similarities and differences to the situation of current authors, from Sherman Alexie to J.K. Rowling. I'll be struggling with these questions for quite some time, I think. Brian also has a fantastic and very important series about racism, institutional racism, in U.S. history, over at his channel Bookish. Last week, Brian talked about 20th and 21st century uses of the Confederate battle flag and its deep roots in not just slavery, but anti-civil rights activities. His video made me think of my father, a white Southern man who worked unbelievably hard to step beyond the kind of overt racism that shaped the culture in which he grew up. As a young man, he rejected the beliefs of his family and became active in the burgeoning civil rights movement. For example, passing out candy bars to black protesters at the lunch counter sit-ins. He even got to drive Ella Baker to various meetings and protests when she visited South Carolina. He became an historian, interested in Southern culture, specifically the development of slave culture in the large rice plantations of coastal South Carolina. If my memory of the story is correct, one of his dates with my mother, also a white Southerner, was to protest at the state capitol in 1961, the year South Carolina decided to start flying the Confederate flag above the Capitol, at the same moment that civil rights protests were spreading throughout the state. In 2000, my father led a contingency of about 90 Southern historians who helped persuade the state to remove the flag. The response was not a full victory. The flag was moved elsewhere on the grounds of the Capitol, and a smaller flag was used. But it was a start. 15 years later, when my father was quite ill, but before he died, he saw South Carolina remove the flag completely, soon after photographs of Dylann Roof posing with a Confederate flag emerged, following his massacre of 9 African Americans in a predominantly black church. Dad died a few weeks before election night in 2016. I've been thinking about him a lot lately, wondering what he would do and how he would try to be a force for positive change in our current situation. Well, I've gone on kind of a long time already, but I want to mention a couple of other great YouTube videos I saw this week. First is the video by Jen at Remembered Reads, who tapped straight into some of my obsessions. In her very thoughtful nonfiction wrap-up, she starts by talking about a memoir/study of disability and fairy tales, a book called Disfigured by Amanda LeDuc. Her next discussion is about new interpretations of modesty through a capitalistic lens of fashion. One of my pet fascinations, and maybe a future essay if I can't get someone else to write about it, is about how a fairly significant number of women involved in social media discussions of modest dress think of their commitments in feminist terms, something I suspect some of you may find surprising. Anyway, Jen's videos are always well-planned and insightful and calm. I'll link to her channel in the description box. Next, I found out from Karen Evans, the great new blogger and thoughtful commenter, that Isabel Wilkerson, author of the fantastic history of the Great Migration, The Warmth of Other Suns, has a new book scheduled to come out in early August called Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. Of course, I was first excited by the video just because of the news of the upcoming publication, but I want to recommend Karen's video to you even if you're not especially a Wilkerson fan. She lays out some of her own background, what assumptions she made and how she's growing, in a really wonderful video. Not a highly dramatic or guilt-ridden performance, but a really honest and thoughtful bit of self-reflection. I highly recommend it, and we'll link to it in the description box. In the next few videos, I hope to make a preliminary TBR for Jane Austen July, to film a video discussing various translations of the ancient poet Sappho, who many suggest was one of the earliest queer writers, although that's a bit complicated. Do the mid-year book FreakOut tag following the excellent lead of Alex at WhatPageAreYouOn, who was kind enough to tag me. Put together a minor book haul, which includes some really long books. And finally, sit down to a serious Friday Reads, which will need to include some of the books I've read over the last few weeks, not just this week. Thanks for joining me today on my weekly rambles. See you soon here on Hannah's Books.